Hello everyone, it's Lindsay, and today I have a review of a product for you guys. So I was reached out to by Arteza Art Products. I've reviewed some of their watercolor or water brush pens in the past, these ones here, as well as their watercolor brush pens. I will link those reviews down below for you guys if you want to check those out. And so they asked me if I'd be interested in reviewing some more product, and so I asked to review their tube watercolor paints. I get a lot of questions on here about watercolors that I use in my Bible journaling, and I know people are on the hunt for budget-friendly watercolors that are decent quality. So I thought I would give these a try and see what I thought about them in comparison to some of the other watercolors that I use. And so I've had these in my hands for a couple weeks and I've been kind of playing with them. And so let me kind of talk about the pros and cons. So these watercolors come in tubes. So if you're not familiar, I know I've showed on my channel the like Kiritake Gonzai Tombi watercolors. These ones come in pans like this. And so usually watercolors come one of two ways. They either come in tubes like this, or they come already solid and dried in pans. So like the Prima watercolors that I use and those kind of things come in these pans. So it just kind of depends on what your preference is, and I always look at price points. I really don't have a preference as to one or the other, depending on the quality of paint. And so the thing with tubed watercolors is that you can either squeeze out a little bit of paint onto a plate or a palette and work directly from the wet watercolor paint. Now this is super concentrated, so you have to be careful. So you can either work from it that way or fill empty pans or an empty palette, let it dry, and then work from it that way. And that is something that I did. I just had a cheapy watercolor palette here that I got from Hobby Lobby, and I went ahead and filled this with that tube watercolor, set this aside for a few days to dry, and then all I have to do is go back in with a damp paintbrush to reactivate the pigment. And that's kind of my preferred way to work with these. I just feel like I have more control over the pigment than if I just squirt out a little bit on a plate and work with it wet. So these two watercolors, this is the 24 set. I do believe they have a couple other options as far as, I think they have like a 12 set and maybe a 36 set. But I think the 24 set is a pretty good variety of colors. And one thing that I like about these as opposed to some of the other kind of craft style watercolors, so like Prima watercolors are kind of more towards the craft community. They have names and numbers specific to those companies, whereas these watercolors come with more traditional color names like vermilion red, sap green, things like that. So if you're following a tutorial online, a watercolor tutorial, and they say, you know, they're mixing a sap green and an ochre or something like that, you'll be able to kind of mimic that look with these colors since they're named, you know, just standard colored names as far as that goes. Now, I'm going to be reviewing these from the standpoint of using them in my Bible journaling. So I am not a trained artist or anything like that. And there's certain things on here that just don't apply to me as far as what I'm using them for. Things like light fast rating. So these do have a light fast rating and an opacity rating on them. And light fast talks about, like, if you're going to paint a painting and then hang it on your wall and sun is shining on that painting, you're going to want to use paints that are very light fast. If you use paints that are not as light fast, then those colors are going to either completely bleach out or change over time in the sunlight. But since I'm using these in my Bible journaling, it's closed, so it's not getting, you know, hit with sunlight all the time, and so that doesn't really apply. Opacity, so like this crimson red, I believe that's these little squares here, talk about opacity. So if you were to paint over a black line, how much of that color is going to just cover up that black line as opposed to like how translucent it is, and you're going to be able to see colors going through as you layer things up. So like I said, I'm not a like professional artist, so that kind of thing doesn't really bother me. I'm looking for cost savings and color variety, and I don't want it to bleed through my Bible pages, and I don't want it to be super chalky. So if you've worked with the watercolor palette from Michaels, I think it's like $5 or $8, something like that. and it dries super, super chalky. I have several videos I'll link down below talking about those paints. I don't want that. I don't want color transfer onto the other side of the page. So usually when you are using a more cost-effective paint, then you have to deal with the chalkiness factor. So I'll kind of talk about that and kind of show you what that looks like. I did go ahead and swatch all of these paints out for my palette. So here's a look at the 24 colors. They are very, very vibrant. I've watched some other reviews that said a couple of the colors, I think like the phthalo blue and the Prussian blue aren't true to a phthalo blue and a Prussian blue, but like I said, I'm not a professional artist, so I'm just looking for pretty colors. That doesn't really bother me unless I'm following a tutorial, like I said, and then the color might not be 100% accurate, but that's fine for me. And so you can see it has really great color. Now, one thing I will note is granulation. And so if you've messed around with a variety of good quality paints, you may notice something called granulation, and that you can see especially in the darker colors like this Prussian blue. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on camera. This mauve pale has some granulation, this deep green, and that's where you're seeing that kind of texture and like a veining that kind of happens as it dries. That's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. Everybody kind of has a preference as far as whether they want granulation or not. I like granulation because I like texture. That's one of the reasons that I love the Daniel Smith Primatech watercolors. These are very expensive. I want to say for this 6 tubes that are only 5 mLs, I want to say it's around $50 for this, whereas these are $26.99 for 24 colors, and these are 12 ml tubes. So these are drastically more cost effective than the Daniel Smith ones. But the Daniel Smith ones, you do get that granulation, which is something that I like. And that's one thing that I really like. It's one of my favorite colors in here is the, I think it's hematite. I don't know, what are these ones? These are created with actual minerals that have been ground up, and you get these like color variances in the colors. And the burnt sienna in this set kind of gives you that same effect where it's kind of a red, brown. You can see the different colors and pigments in that paint. And I really love that. So it does have some features to it that are similar to some of those higher quality paints, but like I said, they're very, very cost effective. And so I just went ahead and swatched these out, you know, based off of where they are in my palette. And so let me talk about a con. So what I did was I squeezed out some of the paint into my palette. Now I had watched several reviews ahead of time before I did my review, just to kind of have an idea of some of the things that other people were saying and problems they might be having. And one of the biggest complaints or cons about this particular set of paints is the cracking. And so typically lower quality paints, when they dry, you get a lot of cracking and flaking when they dry. And so some of the videos had suggested either mixing honey or gum arabic. And I know that sounds weird, but a lot of your professional grade watercolors actually have honey in them as a binder. So when I squeezed these out, I did go ahead, I had some like super natural honey. It wasn't overly processed. And I mixed a pretty good amount of that in with these paints to try to help them stay together and not crack as much. And you can see just how much cracking I still got even with adding the honey in there. So I will say that it's not flaking out and falling out as much. Some of these are, I had to kind of reattach them down. And so the bad side about that is if you close this palette and then open it back up, all this cracking causes the paint to kind of fall out and mix together and kind of make a mess. And so what these are right here these are actually the color not mixed with honey. So just straight from the tube, and you can see the pigment is just floating around. So this would have happened with every single one of these colors if I had not mixed the honey with it. So if you're not wanting to mix honey, if that kind of freaks you out, you can pick up gum arabic. I will link that down below and you can try mixing it. I will try to go back in and maybe mix more of that binder in there and see if that helps the next time I fill one of these palettes. This is at least holding in there fine. So it's working for what I need, but like the black, you can see this was mixed with honey and it's just completely falling apart. So if that bothers you, then you may just want to squeeze just a tiny bit out on a plate and work from it directly while it's wet and not worry about filling a palette like this. Another option for filling is in, let's see if I can find my set here. So these are my Prima watercolors. Another option is for filling half pans or full pans with the pigment. So that is what I did with these. You can order these empty pans. I'll link those down below from Amazon, and these are filled with those Daniel Smith watercolors. And so you could do the same thing. You could fill these pans with this watercolor, but again, you are going to want to mix it with a binder or it will crack even in something like this. And so you can see this is the Daniel Smith watercolors. These were not mixed with any other kind of binder. They're straight from the tube, and you can see there's no cracking. They're not falling out of the pans. They're staying in there no problem. So that's kind of where you'll see the difference between the less expensive paints versus the more expensive paints. But I'm going to kind of experiment some more. I guess you can use glycerin also. So glycerin, gum arabic, or honey are the three things that you can mix with it and get it to kind of stick together. So that's really the main con that I discovered, is that cracking. But so I went ahead and swatched all those out on here, and then I went ahead and created a color mixing chart. So this seems super crazy at first, but what I did was I figured out it's 24 colors. So I did 24 colors across the top, 24 colors across the bottom, and created this kind of grid. So what I did was, if you look at the diagonal here, this is the true straight color is on the diagonal. And then it's just like multiplication tables. So if I'm going to be going cobalt blue to burnt sienna, what I did was on my palette, I mixed a little bit of the cobalt blue and an equal amount of the burnt sienna, and that's where I get that mixed color. So by creating a chart like this, it is very labor intensive with 24 colors. That's a lot. It took me several hours, but I went ahead and I color mixed every single color. And so now I can look at this and see, okay, if I want this really pretty kind of mauve-y purple, I'm going to mix a violet with a scarlet red, equal amounts, and I'll get that really pretty kind of mauve-y purple. If I'm wanting kind of a earthy toned blue, I'll know ultramarine and a little bit of the black will give me that kind of earthy grayish blue color. So this is really helpful for any of your watercolors to produce a color mixing chart like this, because this will show you that even with a small number like a 6 count or a 12 count watercolor will show you just how many different colors you can create from, you know, that palette. So you've got those really bright, intense 24 colors that come in, but by mixing, I can get some of these more earthier tones and some really rich purples and things like that. So this is very valuable for showing you, you know, the different color ranges you can get with that set. And I will say I didn't really have a problem with the colors mixing or anything like that. They weren't separating weird when I was trying to mix colors. They do include a white watercolor paint, and a lot of people, I don't know, true watercolorists kind of frown on that and refuse to use the white because when you're watercoloring, you're supposed to use the true white of the paper. But I like adding the white just to either increase the opacity of a paint if I'm wanting it to be more like a gouache, or it kind of mutes and tones down the colors a little bit. So I do use the white just to kind of change things up, especially if I'm working with like flesh tones and things like that. I can add that white to get just some different colors. So you do have that. And I will be painting a galaxy painting today, and so I will be using the white for the stars. So there's a look at the paints. Now I'm going to go into using them in my Bible and kind of talk more about how they perform on Bible paper, whether they bleed through, and that kind of thing. So I'm going to put you on fast forward, and I'm going to go ahead and create a galaxy painting in my Bible so we can take a look at how the paints really perform on paper. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just reactivate these paints just by spraying some water into the palette. And I am working on a page that's at the very beginning of my Bible, right before Genesis. It's a big open page, and I am just applying some clean water to the page just to get it all saturated. That way I can just drop color in. So I will be painting a galaxy on this page, and I usually try to use galaxies just because they're a good way to test out paints, because you're using a variety of colors, you're layering colors, see how they blend, things like that. So I'll try to enter or insert the the reference photo that I found on Google, and kind of use that for inspiration as I painted this page. But like I said, galaxies can just be super loose and messy, and honestly they look kind of like a hot mess until the very end when you add in the stars and things like that. But for the most part, I'm using paints directly from the palette, but you can see here I am using my mix sheet or my swatch sheet to mix up a custom kind of pale purple color here and put that in there. So it's kind of nice to have those swatch sheets. Now, I will say these watercolors are unique in that I think the pigments are kind of heavy. So typically watercolors, and one thing I really love about watercolors is how they blend and bleed and mix into each other and move. And so you can see up here where it's really wet, the color is moving because there's a lot of water on the page. But down where the page is just damp, those colors don't really move. And so when you stick down color with your paintbrush, it really just looks like dots of color. And typically with other watercolors I've worked with, they will kind of blend and move on their own at this point. And these don't seem to move as much. The pro to that is that if you are new to using watercolors, or if you're inexperienced with watercolors, then it's predictable. You know the color is going to be right where you put it. It's not going to move on you and change as it dries. And so if you're wanting control, it's kind of nice for that. The con for somebody like me is I like that kind of organic look. I like that it changes and kind of blends together and bleeds. And it does do that a little bit, but not to the extent that it does with some of the other colors that I have tried. So here I went ahead and dried that first layer, and now I'm going to go ahead and add a second layer of paint, and I want to see how much that bottom layer lifts. Now I have watched other reviews, and on watercolor paper, these watercolors do lift quite a bit. So if you're wanting to correct a mistake or lift up color from the page, lighten an area, you can do that on watercolor paper. However, on Bible paper, it doesn't really seem to want to lift, which is what I've found with 99% of the watercolors I've used in my Bible. I don't know if it's just, unique to the type of paper that's in the Bible, but you can't really lift the color once you've set it down. So for something like this, that's good because I can go in and layer a second layer of color, and it isn't going to disturb what is already underneath this. So I can go in and kind of deepen up areas, layer different colors on top of each other to get a lot of dimension going in here. And you can see I'm adding a lot of liquid and a lot of pigment, and I'm packing it on because I want to see what the bleed through is like with these watercolors. So I did lose some footage there, but I am taking just the white watercolor straight from the tube, barely diluting it with water and using that to create the stars. And then I will do the same thing with the black paint to color in or paint in some trees. The black watercolor is not a super opaque, rich black in this set. And so I did want to use it straight from the tube with not very much water to get it super opaque. If you're looking for a really rich, deep black, I love the Kuretake Gonzai Tombi black. It's very, very rich and opaque. Now, once this dried, I did rub my hand over it, and I didn't have any kind of chalky paint come off. I did find on my swatch sheets that were painted on watercolor paper, I did have some chalky residue that came up off the paper. But on the Bible page, I don't know what was different, but I didn't really have any chalky residue. And you can see I put a lot of paint, a lot of pigment on there, and I didn't have any rub off. So that's really, really nice. That's I don't want anything transferring to the other side of the page when I shut my Bible. So you can see here's where I'm going in with that black, and I'm not adding any water to the paint. That's paint straight from the tube. I have a damp paintbrush, and I'm laying color down that way. That way it's super opaque over the top of the watercolor that's already on the page. And I'm just using a fan brush to kind of sketch in some trees. And so that's kind of the nice thing about using tube watercolors is you can really change how thick the paint is just based off of how much water you add to it, which you don't get that much control if you're using paints that already come in a pan or something like that, like the Primas. I went ahead and sketched out using my Uniball Signo gel pen. And here's a look at the back. There's no bleed through. There is shadowing. If you want to see a better photo of that, you can head on over to the blog and I have a close-up photo of that, as well as some more close-up photos of the project and the paints and things like that. So if you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave those down below. I have links to the products in the description box as well as a coupon code for you guys. I think these are a great option if you're looking for a quality watercolor for a good price. I think these are great for Bible journaling. So definitely check those out. Give this video a thumbs up if you like these kind of reviews, and subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. And until next time, thank you so much.